Sorry for the delay. We are going to get started. I know it's rainy. I know you're wet. We're having technical difficulties, and so our virtual rally participants are going to have to watch this later on Facebook, but we're going to get started. So thank you for being here. Happy New Year. Welcome to the exciting start of a new legislative session. I am Carol Kuniholm. Yes, hurrah. I am Carol Kuniholm, Chair of Fair Districts PA. We are a nonpartisan coalition, a fiscal project of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, and a grassroots movement of thousands of Pennsylvanians working together for an independent citizens redistricting process. I am here today with representatives of other Pennsylvania organizations and lots of Fair Districts PA supporters from across the Commonwealth, and some of you drove a long way to get here. Thank you. And we know that there are others of you who are watching. We were trying to have you live stream on Facebook. Some of you are watching on YouTube. We will be sharing this video later. We know getting a day off for some of you is a challenge. We know some of you are getting over illnesses, and so the wet weather is not good for you. And we know some of you have jobs and mountains to come across. So thank you for being here. Those of you who are, this is heroic. And the fact that you're here proves that this is a matter of great importance to the people of Pennsylvania. So kudos to you, and thank you for your dedication and determination. Our goal today is to call attention to legislative dysfunction and the need for better procedural rules in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. The status quo in our state legislature is not working for the people of Pennsylvania. In the past session, just 7% of bills introduced received a final vote. Half the bills passed in the House went nowhere in the Senate. Half the bills passed in the Senate, sometimes unanimously, went nowhere in the House. That's been the case. That has been the case for multiple sessions, even though one party has controlled both chambers for 24 of the past 30 years. Some of the legislators gathering now in the building behind us have run on the same campaign promises for decades. Property tax reform. We've been hearing that promise for over 30 years. Equitable, adequate school funding. That's another multi-decade promise. A large new class of legislators, the most diverse in Pennsylvania's history, will be sworn in today. They bring with them many good ideas and many good intentions. Many of them are not yet aware that they will have little say in what happens to those good ideas unless the rules change. Current legislative rules allow one committee chair, elected by a tiny fraction of Pennsylvania voters, to block a bill that has overwhelming public support. You'll hear about some of those from other speakers this morning. In some states, legislative rules are in law or in the state constitution. In Pennsylvania, the rules have been fine-tuned by legislative leaders to put more and more control in the hands of majority leaders and committee chairs in a way that discourages collaboration, mystifies the watching public, and undermines representation. For at least 30 years, Pennsylvania has suffered under gerrymandered districts and an unaccountable, unresponsive legislature. Instead of collaborating to solve real problems, instead of sharing ideas and research on best practices to maximize resources and provide innovative solutions, our legislative leaders have spent decades fine-tuning their opposition to the other party and looking for ways to lock in their own power. Good ideas are blocked rather than have someone else get the credit. Much needed solutions are sabotaged to maintain party advantage. The results: Pennsylvania's legislature accomplishes far less than neighbor states. Part-time legislatures around us pass more bills in 3 or 4 month sessions than the full-time Pennsylvania General Assembly passes in a 2-year session. Meanwhile, outdated bills, unfunded mandates, contradictory regulations, and irrational policies make progress difficult and harm communities our legislators are elected to serve. As a result, Pennsylvania continues to slide backward in important metrics, with some of the poorest cities in the nation, some of the most underfunded schools, record numbers of unrepaired roads and bridges, more uncapped wells and mines than any state in the country, with our young adults facing record student debt and our older homeowners struggling under the crushing burden of mounting property taxes. We are asking our legislators to do something radical and heroic today, to vote no on the status quo, to vote no on rules that take away their right to represent us, and to vote no on rules they have not had time to read and review.
Yeah.
What will happen if enough of them vote no? The leaders will need to negotiate better rules. Rules that repair the vision of representation that shaped our Commonwealth and our nation. Pennsylvania needs rules that ensure bills with strong bipartisan support are given a vote in committee, that ensure that bills voted out of committee with bipartisan support are given a vote on the chamber floor, and that make very clear if bills pass in one chamber with bipartisan support, they should be scheduled quickly for a vote in the other chamber. The vote on rules will impact every one of us every day in more ways than we can count. It's time for a legislature that works with our communities instead of against them. And it's time for a legislative process that serves the people of Pennsylvania instead of the select few struggling to maintain power. With new maps, with organized voters, with courageous legislators choosing to listen, real representation is possible. You'll be hearing next from representatives of other organizations and from some Fair Districts PA volunteers about issues that impact all of us and bipartisan solutions that deserve a vote. FDPA doesn't hold positions on most of these issues. Instead, our position is that bills with bipartisan support should be given a vote. It is time to fix Harrisburg so those votes can happen. Thank you.
My name is Stanley Chapaitis. I'm a retired professor of music from IUP in Indiana, Pennsylvania. And in my retirement, I have become a small-scale organic vegetable farmer. And it's in my farmer capacity today that Carol has asked me to speak to you about a couple of farming-related bills that joined the hundreds of others which died in the legislature this past session. Early in 2021, Republican State Senator Gene Yaw proposed Senate Bill 832, also known as the Clean Streams Act. This provided funding to clean up the streams, waterways of Pennsylvania, and with particular attention on those in the Susquehanna watershed that flow into Chesapeake Bay. Senator Yaw had proposed this same bill in the previous session, but it died in committee. In 2021, and the following year, the passage of this bill became a much more urgent necessity due to a 5-state agreement that Pennsylvania had entered in 2010 to clean up the water going into Chesapeake Bay. Pennsylvania had reaffirmed this in 2014 and agreed to a date of 2025 to have this process completed. By 2021, there was still no action on it, no bills had been passed. Senator Yaw's bill was shuffled between the Appropriations Committee to the Environment Committee, back to the Appropriations Committee, and no further action was taken on it. Meanwhile, in the House, Republican Representative Jonathan Hershey had proposed a nearly identical bill, House Bill 1901. His bill was referred to the House Energy and Environment Committee, where the chair, a person named Darrell Metcalf, described the bill as welfare for farmers and refused to take any action on it. So by summer of 22, with the legislative session winding down, no action yet had been taken on this bill. Meanwhile, the Environmental Protection Agency of the federal government had already announced that it would start statewide inspections and enforcement and perhaps punitive actions on Pennsylvania if there wasn't some motion on this. The happy ending to this story is that Governor Wolf decided that it was very important to include the Clean Streams Fund, which was the heart of the bill, both bills, in his yearly budget. And by what we now think is a miracle, it got passed. If it had not been for the governor's budget, farmers, county governments, municipal governments would have been facing very serious consequences, as they really lacked the funding, expertise, wherewithal to meet the requirements that the EPA would have asked. As a small-scale farmer myself, I can tell you without hesitation that Mr. Metcalf's description of this bill as welfare for farmers is delusional. I would never have had the money, if I had needed, to plant and maintain riparian barriers to keep the runoff from going into streams and rivers. I would not have been able to build and maintain a methane digester to handle on-farm manure management. I would never have known how to build, maintain, and fund a series of settling pools that would help to mitigate acid mine drainage. And this is all what the EPA wanted people to do. Now, fortunately for me, none of these issues actually affected my farm. I'm on a hillside and no river runs through it. But there are many issues that do. So I got curious and I did some research and I found over a dozen bills proposed in the last session of the legislature that would have positively impacted me and my colleagues who sell at local markets. These were bills that had to do with boosting funding for SNAP benefits or regulations to protect pollinators or to manage workforce problems or so on. They were bills that gave incentives for agroforestry and for on-farm production of compost and biofuels. All of them died in committee. None even got to a vote. They all died in committee, as we know, because Pennsylvania allows one committee chair to stifle any bill, even though that committee chair is elected by a tiny percentage of the population, and the bill might affect the whole state. These committee chairs are selected much more for their loyalty to the party than they are for their service to the people of Pennsylvania or, for any expertise or knowledge that they might have. So, it's time, I think, for Pennsylvania to demand that these bad rules of the legislature be thrown out with last year's garbage and new ones get written that allow thoughtful and well-thinking legislators like Gene Yaw and Jonathan Hershey to get a voice and to get a vote. So I'm going to close by saying a very, very heartfelt thumbs up to Carol Kuniholm and to Fair Districts PA and to the League of Women Voters for their making this event possible. And I also want to give a very hearty thumbs down to the Pennsylvania legislatures of the past for making this event necessary. As the new legislature convenes, let's show them that we are listening to them and watching very carefully what they do. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank Carol, as well as Fair Districts PA, the League of Women Voters, as well as you all that have braved the elements this morning and came out. Obviously, this is an important issue. My name is Brandon Flood. I serve as the Deputy Director of Government Affairs for Ceasefire PA. For those of you who are unfamiliar with let's clap it up for Ceasefire PA. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with our organization, what we do, we serve as the Commonwealth's leading gun violence prevention advocacy organization. And much like the preceding speaker has shared with you all, we too, our organization and the constituency that we serve, we have been adversely impacted by the way that these rules have been written. Whenever a committee chair tells the public unabashedly that I will not run any gun bills in my committee, something needs to be fixed. Am I right? Yeah. So we need to get away from allowing personal preference to take priority over the voices of the people. It's not just a Philly issue when it comes to gun violence. City of Harrisburg has been impacted, City of York. I myself also am a gun violence survivor as well. I was shot 3 times in 2005 right down here in Harrisburg. So it permeates this Commonwealth. So whenever you have a lawmaker from Franklin County dictating to the rest of the Commonwealth what's needed and what's not needed, something is extremely wrong. And more specifically when it comes to gun safety and gun access legislation, there's a ton of bills to cite, but I'll cite a few in particular. One of the things that Carol pushes is bipartisan solutions, right? Lawmaking is meant to be predicated on consensus building, not dictating, right? So there are 3 pieces of legislation, at least when it comes to gun safety, gun access, that have bipartisan support. The ones that you may be more familiar with is extreme risk protection orders, ERPOs. 19 different states have adopted the ERPO mechanism. And for anyone that's unfamiliar with what ERPOs do, extreme risk protection orders allows either a family member or law enforcement to petition the court to remove someone's firearms if they pose a threat to themselves or to someone else. And it's a civil process where they certainly have due process. A judge can deliberate and see whether or not that threat is credible. And that person will also at some point will be able to have those firearms given back to them once they show that that threat is no longer visible. As I said, there's 19 other states that have adopted this policy, more notably the state of Florida. Everyone knows that the governor down there, Governor DeSantis, is considered the Republicans' bastion of the party, right? So if he found ERPOs to be a reasonable policy, certainly Pennsylvania needs to follow suit. Another piece of policy that has some bipartisan support, and more importantly, it's just common sense shit, is safe storage, right? And it's a lot of different iterations that safe storage can take on. That can be child access prevention, drafting, legislation that's geared to ensuring that children don't access guns. As we know, there's been a number of cases, more than should be, where children have accessed guns and either have shot themselves or their siblings. There's the safe storage policies when it comes to people that are prohibited, that live in certain, you have someone in your home that may be prohibited from having a firearm. And more importantly, just safe storage, right? You have a weapon of destruction in the house, and someone potentially could access it. It only makes sense for you to store that in some way, shape, or form where it's not readily accessible. So that's one other policy. And then the other policy has to do with preemption of local gun control or local regulation. As you guys may know, a while back, the legislature had determined that cities and municipalities can't create their own ordinances as it relates to gun control. And that essentially they have to follow the letter of the law as it relates to the state. And you heard me mention earlier, exactly. There's a number of municipalities across this Commonwealth that have suffered mightily from the gun violence epidemic. Philadelphia, most notably, York, I believe, is experiencing highs in homicides since the early 90s. So we need to be able to authorize these cities to protect themselves. And I get where people say, hey, they don't want this convoluted patchwork of different laws, but there are some municipalities that need to use the scalpel as opposed to the sledgehammer, right? So they know better how to narrow their interests and address their concerns on a local level. That was a bill that didn't also have bipartisan support. You can go through the Pennsylvania Municipal League of Municipalities. We haven't quantified, but a significant number of municipalities want that local control. Victim community wants proper or gun safety and gun access legislation. So the consensus is there, right? And I'll share one last thing with you all. I see, one thing that people may not know is I'm a Republican. Go ahead and boo and yes. But what I want to charge, I'm a Republican and I'm also a gun owner. And as you heard me mention, I'm also a gun violence survivor. So what I want, someone mentioned about the largest incoming class here in history. What I want to, my takeaway for the Republicans, the newly incoming Republicans, and even some of the moderate Democrats, come out of the shadows. You know, you can't wait for leadership to change things. You guys are the change. You guys are the ones that are going to usher in the change. You know, it's time for the Republican Party to rebrand, you know, and I'm trying to lead that charge. So I'm letting you know, as I mentioned earlier, bipartisan solutions is ultimately what's going to, you know, drive Pennsylvania forward. So I give that charge to the newly incoming legislators, and then lastly, to the constituents. You know, some of your legislators may be on board with the rule changes. Talk to your legislators, see where they are with it, right? We know that Harrisburg needs to be fixed. It's never going to be a perfect model. There's always going to be room for improvement. So engage your legislator about how better to create the rules. You know, for those of you that follow how the regulatory process works in Pennsylvania, whenever regulations go through the Independent Regulatory Review Commission, they have what's known as public input, right? Before they adopt a rule that dictates how an agency functions and operates, the public has an opportunity to weigh in. Perhaps the legislature may want to model such a mechanism. So again, thank you all. Thank you for braving the efforts, the elements, and I look forward to standing with you all this legislative session.
Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate you being here. My name is Sandra Miller, and I am representing Education Voters of Pennsylvania today. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to ensure that Pennsylvania lawmakers focus on a pro-education agenda. And as Carol had mentioned, many of us have been battling for equitable and fair funding, but we also are working on charter reform. Today, I'm standing with so many of our advocates that truly want to help our fellow Pennsylvanians. Education Voters of Pennsylvania and Susan Spica, our fearless executive director who couldn't attend today, has been trying for years to have our charter school system reformed. I will tell you the story of that reform that so many citizens want and never gets a vote on in our General Assembly. There are many groups that are advocating for change, and I will share some data from Ed Voters and our partners at Children's First and the Pennsylvania School Board Association, but let's go over some facts. In 2021, Pennsylvania spent $2.9 billion on student tuition bills for charter and cyber charter schools. Most of this funding will come from our property taxes. PA's weak charter school law has allowed the waste, fraud, and abuse of our taxpayer money to go to our charter school sector. While many of these charters underperform academically and struggle to operate efficiently and ethically. For example, all cyber charter schools have failed to meet the state performance standards, and some have the lowest graduation rates of all education providers in the state. Unfortunately, it's nothing new. During the 5 years that the state has issued our school performance profiles, none, that means none, of our cyber schools have received passing grades. When it comes to graduation rates, our traditional public schools graduate 88.4% of our students, whereas charter schools fall to 64.9%, mostly due to the abysmal charter graduation rates of cyber. Even with this poor performance, charter school enrollments have continued to rise. Perhaps it's from the $35 million that has been spent in the last 2 years on advertising alone. Charter school enrollment has risen over 151%, with an increase of over 300% in tuition costs since the 2007 school year. When it comes to special education, charter schools are not paid the same way. In 2014, the Special Education Commission recommended that schools be paid in a 3-tiered system. However, the charter schools lobbied the General Assembly, and they were excluded from the system. Reforms in charter schools paid for special education would result in savings of over $199 million a year. Cyber charter schools are also paid the same as our brick and mortars. All research show that these schools cost so much less to operate. However, they receive the same reimbursement per student that our brick and mortar partners do. Setting a statewide rate would save taxpayers over $174 million a year. With all this taxpayer money being spent, you would believe that there'd be more transparency and accountability, right? You would think that there would be people listening to us. Well, the school boards have. The school boards have passed resolutions at 445 of the 500 school districts in Pennsylvania. That's over 88% calling for charter school reform. The bills would reform the way that bills to reform the charter schools have been introduced to address the failures and abuses and never move out of committee. For example, Representative Reese introduced House Bill 272 last session. 74 other representatives signed on as co-sponsors, 11 Republicans and 62 Democrats. That's a true bipartisan bill. The plan, which was part of Governor Tom Wolf's budget proposal, holds the low-performing charters to accountability to improve their quality, protects the taxpayers by reining in escalating costs, and increased transparency. By setting the statewide cyber charter rate and requiring all special education reimbursement to go through the formula, it would save Pennsylvania taxpayers over $374 million a year. However, it never left committee. It never had any action at all. A bipartisan bill like that needs to get recognized and needs to move. Our General Assembly must do better by our children, by our school districts, and especially for our taxpayers who rely on our representatives to pay attention to the will of our constituents. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Ann Pehle, past president of AAUW-Pennsylvania, where I served for 4 years. And I am a resident of Silver Spring Township. AAUW has advocated for the equity for women and girls for 140 years across the country and at the federal level. AAUW-Pennsylvania has been doing the same since 1926. For 97 years, this nonpartisan organization of volunteers throughout Pennsylvania has met with legislators to support Pennsylvania legislation that promotes equity for women and girls. While the issues we support are nonpartisan, the foundation, which is our foundation, none of that has changed. What has changed is the political climate. Our public policy priorities have always talked about representative government, equal voices, and the ability for people to get their voice heard and bills to be voted on. This is why AAUW Pennsylvania is a proud endorsing organization of Fair Districts PA and happy to be on the Capitol steps today. Let me talk about 3 issues in which the legislation did not make it to the Pennsylvania House or Senate or a floor vote. And these are issues that affect women and girls and their social economic security across the Commonwealth. The Family Care Act was a bipartisan piece of legislation with public support and business support that never made it out of committee, and even after COVID made it painstakingly clear how the lack of paid family and medical leave could result in the economic destruction of families, workforces, businesses, and regional economies. Women, and especially women of color, were more likely to be frontline workers, were at greater risk of catching the virus, and yet continue to have minimal access to paid family or medical leave as they juggle their work and caregiving responsibilities. As a result, 4 times as many women left the workforce in 2020 than men. Despite the well-coordinated efforts of the Nonpartisan Family Act Coalition, this legislation did not make it out of committee. The second issue, legislation was introduced to create a path for a livable wage in Pennsylvania. 3 pieces of legislation were introduced to address the issues of Pennsylvania's meager minimum wage, one by a Republican senator, another by Democratic senators, and a third by Democratic representatives. In spite of all the evidence pointing to the need for an increase in PA minimum wage, no action has been taken by the legislators in Harrisburg. And the third issue is an issue that's near and dear to AAUW. That's equal pay. As you can tell, we believe in equal pay for equal work. One of the 4 public policy issues of AAUW-Pennsylvania is to improve the economic self-sufficiency of all women, which includes pay equity and fairness in compensation and benefits. In every General Assembly, legislation has been introduced to update Pennsylvania's equal pay law. Yes, Pennsylvania has an equal pay law. It was passed in 1959. And while not the strongest of the land, it's acceptable, but it was made weaker in 1967 with the passage of an amendment that excludes anyone who is subject to the federal Fair Labor Standards Act. So let me give you a minute to explain why this is important to everyone here today. Most likely, you are excluded from the protections of the Pennsylvania 1959 Equal Pay Law. The Federal Labor Standards Act applies to all employees except those in the following jobs. Now, as I list these, make note, did you ever do these jobs? Do you have a family member, a neighbor, anybody that you know who are in these jobs? And remember, these people are excluded from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Babysitters on a casual basis, companions for the elderly, farm workers employed on small farms, employees employed by certain seasonal and recreational establishments, federal criminal investigators, fishing, newspaper delivery, newspaper employees of limited circulation newspapers, seamen on other than American vessels, and switchboard operators. The 1967 amendment to Pennsylvania's law excluded anybody who is covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. Therefore, the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law only covers persons employed in those positions I just listed. So I suspect that very few persons here or that you know are covered by Pennsylvania's Equal Pay Law because of the 1967 amendment. Fixing this seems very easy, yet legislation to strengthen Pennsylvania's current equal pay has laid dormant in the committees. AAUW Pennsylvania works with legislators and nonpartisan organizations to introduce equal pay legislation. AAUW Pennsylvania will continue to work with Nonpartisan Family Care Act Coalition, We the People, and Raise the PA Wage to provide grassroots support to the issues of paid sick leave, the raising of the minimum wage, because these issues impact economic security for women. And AAUW proudly continues to work with Fair Districts PA to end gerrymandering and fix Harrisburg. Okay.
Good morning. Thanks for coming. I'm Glen Heise, a Fair Districts PA volunteer and retired family physician. I want to acknowledge another physician, Dr. Rachel Sorgengoff, a retired internist and chair of the Fair Districts PA Rules Research Team for researching and writing the first draft of this presentation. She couldn't be here today because of illness. At Fair Districts PA, we believe bills with bipartisan support should be given a vote in committee. Bills voted out of committee deserve a vote on the chamber floor. And bills passed in one chamber deserve a vote in the other. Let me tell you about 3 important healthcare issues which remain unaddressed by our legislature. They are unaddressed because procedural rules allow single individuals to block bills in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. Carbon monoxide alarms. In Pennsylvania, carbon monoxide alarms are not required in public schools, dormitories, or daycare centers. In October of last year, 28 children and 4 adults were taken to the hospital because of high levels of carbon monoxide at an Allentown daycare center. The high levels were detected by emergency workers after they were called because of a child who had become unconscious. There were no carbon monoxide alarms in the daycare center. A bill requiring carbon monoxide alarms in daycare centers had passed the Senate unanimously 3 times in 2017, 2019, and 2021. After 6 years, this bill has never yet been considered in the House. It has never been voted on in the House committee to which it was assigned. Prescribing privileges for nurse practitioners. Not everyone agrees what prescribing privileges nurse practitioners should have, but a bill allowing nurse practitioners independent prescribing privileges passed the Senate with overwhelming support in 2015, 2017, and 2019. The bill has never gotten a vote in the House committee to which it was assigned. So rank and file legislators have never had the opportunity to vote on a proposal which many people believe would make good health care available to more Pennsylvanians. Lead poisoning. In September 2021, a national report listed Pennsylvania as the 6th worst state in the nation for high levels of lead in children. This should not have been news. We have old housing stock. We have old water pipes that contain lead. In 2019, a state Senate report paid for by you, the taxpayers of Pennsylvania, recommended 10 ways to reduce lead poisoning in the state. One recommendation was to mandate lead screening for toddlers. The legislature passed one bill to encourage lead screening. Bills addressing the other 9 recommendations have been introduced, but have never been considered, never voted on in committee. Our children remain at high risk for lead poisoning. And there are other health issues that aren't being addressed by our legislature. Pennsylvania has still not passed a law regulating general medical telehealth services. Bills allowing municipalities to share firefighting and ambulance services were introduced in 2019 and 2021. They have never made it out of committee. These are reasons why we need to fix Harrisburg. Rank and file legislators must be given the opportunity to act on bills. No legislative leader should be able to block consideration of a bill that has bipartisan support. Bills with bipartisan support should be given a vote in committee. Bills voted out of committee deserve a vote on the chamber floor, and bills passed in one chamber deserve a vote in the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. In 2016, I got interested in redistricting reform in Pennsylvania for 2 reasons. I was reading the Pennsylvania Constitution. I know, Tony, get a life, Tony. And I noted that Article 2, Section 16 says that unless absolutely necessary, no county, city, incorporated town, borough, township, or ward shall be divided in forming a senatorial or legislative district. The second thing was I live in Lancaster County, where the 6 square mile township, Lancaster Township, they found it absolutely necessary to divide into 4 separate districts. So I figured either I didn't understand what unless absolutely necessary meant. It's possible. Or something was going on. So I began to look into redistricting reform in Pennsylvania, and it didn't take long for me to bump into an organization called Fair Districts PA. And this is in 2016, and they looked like a pretty good group, and I filled out a form online and volunteered to do some things. And about a week later, I got a call from Kuniholm. It was a short phone call, but by the end of the phone call, I was in charge of the then non-existent Fair Districts PA Speakers Bureau. Yeah. I said yes to a question I didn't fully understand. And that Speakers Bureau, and since then, 2016, I have spoken to over 105 groups in Pennsylvania, and 4,000 people. But that Speakers Bureau, under the guidance of the amazing Ruth Yeiser for the last 5 years, has spoken to 1,200 events in Pennsylvania, nearly 46,000 people. This legislature knows who we are. And it's because of volunteers. Many of you are here today, and you need volunteers that don't have the sense to get out of the rain. You really need that. And we got them. But because of you, we have tugged on the coat of every legislator in the last 2 sessions by email, by phone, postcards. We have had Zoom visits with them. We've had in-person visits with them. They know who we are. They know what we want. They know we are watching them. And today we're here to let them know we are not going away. So that brings us to today and why we're here. Now, everybody here, tell me you don't have something else to do on a day like today other than this. So thank you so much. So we're all here. We all have our reasons for being here. We all have our reasons, our stories, why we think this is important to us. This is my story. In 1968, I was a 19-year-old combat infantryman in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne. At 19, I saw young men die for this country, and I can't tell you what they may have thought that sacrifice was for. For God, for country, for duty, for the guy in the foxhole next to them. But I can tell you with absolute certainty, not one of them died so that politicians could draw lines to rig political elections. That's not an America anyone would fight and die for. That's not the America we tell our children and grandchildren we live in. Gerrymandering and rules that thwart the democratic process, to me, dishonor those sacrifices, and they dishonor the oath that our legislators will be taking today in this building. This Pennsylvania General Assembly is going to be a session like no other. Majority party margins in the Senate are tighter than they've been. In the House, they're disputed. Those tight margins mean that this incoming class of legislators has an opportunity to do something remarkable. They can prove that American democracy can work. They can. American democracy can do the people's business efficiently. We know what we're going to get if they don't try. But because of these tight margins, a handful of legislators in both houses and both parties can make a huge difference. But making that difference will take courage. Now, we know what kind of government we're going to get if they don't try. Same kind of government we've had. A dysfunctional, non-productive group. But think of what they might accomplish if they actually made the effort. Now, you can dismiss me as a naive and good government idealist. Look at me. I'm way too old to be naive. And I'm way too angry to be an idealist. but I'm not so far gone to not believe in the potential of American democracy. Not in its perverted, take no prisoners, hyper-partisan form that Democrats and Republicans have devolved to over the past decade or so, but the ideal of American representative democracy where ideas are debated and discussed and voted on. They have a chance to renew American democracy in Pennsylvania, where that ideal was born. And it won't be easy for them. It won't be easy for them because the party demands certain loyalty. But as President Kennedy said, sometimes the party asks too much. Our legislators are taking the oath of office today. They ran to make a difference, and now they can. But real change will take courage. The courage to vote no to rules if they hadn't had the time to review them and know what's in them. The courage to vote no for rules that take away their ability to represent us, and the courage to vote yes for rules that allow bipartisan solutions to get a vote in committee, on the floor, and in both chambers. We want serious bipartisan solutions to be discussed. I mean, Carol mentioned that, we're kind of radical. Well, here's our radical idea. We want the Pennsylvania General Assembly to be a deliberative body and deliberate. That's our radical idea. We don't ask for X number of bills to be passed each session. We do ask that the Pennsylvania General Assembly do the job they were elected to do. That they have the courage to tackle the difficult issues that hamper Pennsylvania's economy and undermine the health, safety, and education and welfare of all Pennsylvanians. We ask that they have the courage to fix Harrisburg.
Hi everyone, I'm Jodi Reese, volunteer for Fair Districts. I love listening to Tony's talks that he gives, and I don't appreciate having to be the one who follows him. But I was asked today to give you an idea of what's going to go on behind us, because I have actually read the transcripts for the first session day of 2017, 2019, 2021, and as Tony said, I need to get a life. So what happens at noon is that they will all be in their respective chambers. They will have a prayer, a pledge of allegiance. The election results are presented to them and they're certified, and then they start taking the oath of office. In the Senate, it is always that they give the oath first to the majority party members and then to the minority. In the House, it's always been one big group, but last year they took a little more time and they divided the members up into 4 groups in the House, and after each oath was given, there was a photo op. So it takes a little time. Then there are the nominations for Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem in the Senate. So we have no idea what's going to happen in the House. I think that we know that there will be things tried and things done, but we don't know what the result is or how long it's going to take. You may hear members standing up and asking for parliamentary inquiries because they don't have rules yet. So it's going to be very interesting to watch what goes on there. We can't tell you exactly what time that's going to start, but I know I'm going to be watching to see what happens there. In the Senate, there's not so much of a disagreement going on there, so it might take them a little quicker to get to that. But once those elections are over, then they have the vote on the rules, and that's what we're here about right now. At this point in time, I can tell you that whatever resolution that gets introduced for the House rules, which are different than the Senate rules, are not available to us. I checked this morning. So we have no idea. No idea if they're exactly the same, no idea if there have been changes, and guess what? our legislators, our rank and file legislators that represent us, don't know what's in them either because they haven't gotten them. And that's occurred in 2017, 2019, 2021, and that's why we're asking for the no. So then the rules are done, and the last thing that they do is they have a joint session together to actually look at the election results and certify them for statewide. So the Senate and the House have to get done with the rules, and then they notify each other that they are organized and ready for business. And then the Senate actually proceeds over to the House chamber. They will have a joint session, and then they go back, they do a few more housekeeping administrative things, and then it's over for the day. I will tell you, in 2017 and 2019, they were done by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Last year, there was a little issue in the Senate not wanting to seat Senator Brewster. And so that took several extra hours, so they didn't actually recess for the day until about 6 or 6:30. So that, I'm wanting to give you a little bit of a timeline as to when it's typically over. This is not going to be typical, but I hope you will be watching, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jodi. They're going to start soon. It's almost noon. Some of us will be gathering. If you want to watch the proceedings, we can't go into the chambers. You've got to have tickets to do that today. But there will be it will be screening on 2 large screens down in the cafeteria area. So if you go all the way through the building, go down the escalator to the East Wing Rotunda, there are seats and screens underneath the escalator, kind of on the sides of the escalator. We'll be gathering down there, watching, paying attention. Also, I think there are some leftover postcards. And Jean, there are leftover postcards. You might want to go in and just hand them to people as you go in. And do we have people who scoped out the route up to the chambers? Okay, it's not possible. So anyhow, we have leftover postcards. If you want to give them out, we don't want to take them home because after today they're kind of useless. So if you want to do that, if you want to leave signs here, I'll put them back in my car. If you want to take them in the building and take them home, please do. Thank you so much for being here. You are the best. You are the fantastic. I'm so impressed with your determination to show up. Thank you for doing this, and we're going to keep working on this until we have a legislature that actually listens and represents us. So thank you for your work. Fix Harrisburg.